Welcome, everybody, to this week's Pluralia Dialogos, where I'm very, very honored to be joined by two fantastic minds, analysts Alex Krainer and Glenn Diesen, who I think everybody here watching this live stream or the recording already know very well. And we're going to go through a lot of topics today. I chose to title this Caught Between Two Systems. Obviously, the world is being pulled in different directions. Different ideas of the future, not necessarily compatible ideas, are pulling the world, shaping strategy for good or for bad. And a lot of disinformation, smoke, and mirrors are holding us now between our point today and that future that we're going to be living in. Hopefully, it's going to be one that's compatible with human dignity, natural law, hopefully. But again, there's a lot of traps along the way. So, guys, thank you so much for joining me for today's short conversation. Recently, we had obviously what's on everybody's mind, what's on my mind, and I know you guys have talked about this on Glenn's show not that long ago, but I'd like to unravel this a little bit before we expand out. Just a little over a week ago, Putin showed up in Alaska. There's a very interesting set of conversations, press releases, and discussions pertaining to what was discussed. Not a lot of detail as far as like concrete decisions, but I mean, certainly this is not a common occurrence, and the fact that that happened just before another strange event happened, which I'd like to get your thoughts on eventually, regarding all of the world or the European so-called leaders showing up at the White House doing some strange maneuvers, saying some weird things. But I'd like to get your take. So what do you think was the outcome of this, or what was the purpose and what was the outcome of the US-Russian summit? Maybe I'll start with Glenn on this one.
Well, I think the main motivation by both the United States and Russia is to improve bilateral relations, because the relations are more or less hostage to the conflicts taking place in Europe. Now, the extent to which Trump actually wants the conflict to end, or if he just wants to outsource the containment of Russia to the Europeans, is yet unclear. But I think this reflects a wider recognition of the direction of the world, because the hegemonic era is more or less over. And in the hegemonic era, you preserve global primacy by containing all rising powers. But when you reach a certain point that is crossing into a multipolar distribution of power, all this does is push all these other great powers together, which is what you see now. Russia, China, you can put Iran and India into the mix as well. And there was some recognition of this and concerns of this. Indeed, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you saw the Germans and the French especially were concerned that if they pushed too hard against the Russians, Russia would no longer diversify its ties. It would end up in the arms of China. Now, the Biden logic, as many other American leaders suggested, is we can use the Ukrainians to knock out Russia from the ranks of great powers, and then we can focus our resources on confronting China. Now, obviously, this didn't work. NATO has lost this proxy war, so it seems as if the Trump administration's thought here is, let's reach a hand out to the Russians so they won't go too far towards China. And of course, if the conflict or tensions will continue, let's at least make sure the Europeans arm themselves to the teeth, and this can be their problem. And then I think this is what Alaska symbolized as well. Instead of meeting in a European country, essentially on the front lines of a redivided Europe, where they met on their common border, which suggests that they should reconceptualize their relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now that's really well said. But Alex, do you think that, so it seems like there is a recognition that multipolarity, the idea of the old end of history hegemony, is not working. That model is not functioning any longer, as much as those many a technocrat and warmonger had dreamed that this would really be the end of history. There seems to be some willingness to adapt to the fact that no, that's not the case, like Glenn was saying. But do you think that the motive is it's true that there is the multipolar nations of especially Eurasia have found themselves stronger in their collaboration with each other, more integrated, especially in the last 8, 9 months. But do you think that this is a mistake that the figures controlling Trump are making because they would rather carve out or weaken the Russia-China alliance, or do you think that there's an actual motive to try to help strengthen the Russia-China and other alliance amongst the Eurasian powers by virtue of some of the belligerent talk and maybe even threats of sanctions, but not really being able to follow through?
No, I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's being done deliberately and with some premeditation, or maybe with complete premeditation. I think, I particularly like the way you have titled this conversation, "Caught Between Two Systems," because I think it's extremely important to keep this context in mind, that we really are caught between two systems, or at least that's how they frame it for us. We had George Soros said, this is all of this, not just Ukraine, but the Middle East conflict with China, with Iran, and so forth. It's all part of the conflict between two systems of governance. And then Soros says it's open societies versus closed societies. We have others who say that it's between democracies and autocracies, and so on and so forth. But this really is the context which kind of makes everything fit together, and then you can understand a bit better what's going on. And I would only correct, my impression is that it's not really two systems of governance opposed to one another, that it's one system opposed to everything and everyone else. And so this system of governance that's opposed to everyone else is the Western-centric colonialist system of governance that always emerges where you get a rule by the money-lending oligarchy. And I think that the logic of this conflict is always you're either with us or you're against us. So you can be a vassal, or if you're not a vassal, then you oppose the systems, and then you must be crushed. And so the same applies to the United States. You're either, you either submit to this system, you're either part of it, or you must be destroyed. And this is not something that started happening now in the last 20 years. This is something that has been happening for more than 200 years. And there was a period of time when, the United States declared independence. That's how the United States came to be. And they declared independence from whom? From the British Empire. And British Empire is exactly the how do you call it, incarnation of this system, of this oligarchic colonialist system of governance. So then the United States would have to be crushed. And so you had Declaration of Independence, and then you had war between the United States and Great Britain, and then you had another, after they tried to crush Russia in the Crimean War. Well, they succeeded, kind of. Then they switched their attention immediately to the United States. And then you had the Civil War happen in the United States, where, again, the objective was to crush the United States, to divide it, to create two weaker client states to the empire, again, to this same oligarchic. Basically, what they want is a one world rule, global domination. And this all perpetuates itself to this day. And the United States has gone through cycles of being subordinated to this system, and then again a resistance emerging. So we had Abraham Lincoln resisting the system, Then you had Theodore Roosevelt, who completely was a vassal to the system. Then you had FDR, who wanted to break free of the system. Then you had Harry Truman, who was completely their tool. Then you had JFK, who wanted to break free from the system. Then you had a series of presidents who were complete tools of the system up until now. And Trump, again, is an expression of the United States wanting to break free from this.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a big difference now, because before it was, the United States was, the system, this oligarchic imperialist system was fighting India, then they were fighting Russia, then they were fighting the United States, then they were fighting France, then they were fighting Germany. Now they have three major powers who completely understand what the game is. And so now the imperial system, the globalist system, is confronted by not only Russia, but also China, Iran, and the United States now with Trump. And it's, just so we understand, this is not just Trump who's saying enough with this. We're going to be make America great again. We're going to embrace multipolar integrations, and that's how it's going to be because I'm the president. No, Trump is just the spearhead of a movement in the United States that is much broader and much more robust, which has had it up to here with the empire, because the United States has been mostly in the service of empire as its as the financier and the military enforcement arm of the empire. But the benefits have accrued mostly to the old colonialist networks, which are in Europe, primarily on the axis of London and Paris. And now, as we see, the fight is gathering. We had a meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska. We don't know exactly what they discussed, but we know that nobody from either side was there really with expertise focused on Ukraine war. So the respective delegations were mostly people with expertise in foreign affairs, trade,
diplomacy, yeah, right,
yeah, and the people who were in charge of negotiating the peace, ceasefire, truce in Ukraine, they were not even invited. They were not even there.
True, Kellogg wasn't there, and
yeah. And now, we had Trump starting to target the old Cold War hands, the people who are part of the oligarchic system, like John Bolton and Hillary Clinton, and they're just knocking them out one by one. And then we had Tulsi Gabbard canceled the how do you call it, the sharing of information, sharing of intelligence with the Five Eyes. So everything pertaining to the negotiations between the United States and Russia will no longer be shared with the Five Eyes intelligence networks, meaning the British, Canadian, New Zealand intelligence networks. And she also canceled the security clearances of 37 members of the intelligence community. And then Trump also fired everybody from they had like this interagency body that was basically set up under Biden administration immediately in the aftermath of the beginning of the war in Ukraine, whose whole purpose was to antagonize Russia and to brainstorm ways to destabilize Russia and to sabotage them. Trump fired them all, and then he also offered a buyout scheme to the CIA to basically tell them, okay, you're going to get so many years forward pay, but you leave. And the whole point was to purge the system, to kind of drain the swamp. And they are advancing along this line very earnestly in a very real way. And I think that you don't have a choice of doing it halfway, because this really is a deadly serious conflict. And you can't give your opponents any kind of an advantage. You can't fight this fight halfway. You can't kind of move forward in a half-hearted way and then say like, oh yeah, like in the first administration of Trump, he surrounded himself practically with the members of this swamp, with John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel and all of these people. And the result was he wasn't able to achieve hardly anything, and they kept attacking him, not only through judicial proceedings and impeachment proceedings and so forth, investigations, but also through the media. And you notice this time around, it's very, very different. His opponents are very quiet, and he's been able to purge them much more effectively from the system, and he's continuing to do so. At the same time, the relations between between Trump and between the United States and Russia really are improving, and they really are collaborating and coordinating policy. And as we found out a few weeks ago from Marco Rubio, there are secret meetings and discussions going on between the two sides.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you laid out your hypothesis you used that time very well to lay out a strong hypothesis. And it's not an easy one to put forth, but I value that you did that. I'm not fully sold on the elements entirely, but it's good to have this in mind, and I hope it's true. I guess one thing that strikes me that we've talked about is a few directions I can go here, but for me, one thing when I hear that is, well, actually, no, I'm not going to go there yet. Sorry, I've got a question about Palantir, but I'm not going to do that yet. First, since we're still talking about the U.S.-Russian negotiations, there was the New York Times a few days ago that put out a little message. Not too sure how much of this is misinformation, saying Trump backs plan to cede land for peace in Ukraine. It did seem, following through, that there was an openness to do that. Now, what power Trump specifically has, or the U.S. has, to actually carry out such an exchange remains questionable. And more recently, Ursula just this morning put out a little message here in commenting on Zelensky leading Ukraine's defiant Flag Day amid worldwide solidarity. She writes, "A free, democratic, and independent Ukraine. That's what you are fighting for. That's what our efforts are all about. We are with you for as long as it lasts," or whatever it is. So, okay, empty words. But there's definitely it seems like the U.S. could end or accelerate the ending of this conflict by simply stopping today, just shutting down military support, military aid. We know that there are certain things that have been done. I think there was an announcement that the U.S. has banned or had said no to Ukraine's use of U.S.-made long-range missiles into Russia. How they can enforce that, I don't even know. But why do you think that Trump hasn't fully just cut off military support for Ukraine yet, when it could have been done, and forced this crippling of the Kyiv sort of junta from being able to carry out its ongoing conflict? Glenn, I'll throw that one at you.
Well, I think a key problem is, first, that he doesn't have a great support from the American political class or the Europeans or from Zelensky. So he stands very much alone, and that makes it very difficult if indeed he's genuine that he wants to bring this war to an end. So this is why when he has this little spats where he starts to suggest, Ukraine should attack Russia directly, it's not fair to only be on the defensive. I'm not sure if he's doing it to put pressure on Russia, or if he's throwing a bone to his own hawks, because there are a lot of them. So I think, that is a key reason why I can't cut it off. And second, I do think that they want an actual deal, something of an agreement, so they won't leave too much of a mess behind. If Ukraine falls apart now, Russia can dictate the outcome, and I don't think necessarily he sees this as being in America's interest. So, but again, it's hard to know with Trump what he says and what he does. Is not always the same. But but what is interesting, what you first suggested, is he has a lot of control over some of the Russian demands, because the Russian demands, you can summarize it in three major categories, at least the ones that are difficult to meet. The first is restoring Ukraine's neutrality, which primarily means no NATO. And the second is the territorial concessions. And the third is the security guarantees, which the Russians won't have anything of, because that would, again, undermine the neutrality issue. But when it comes to no NATO and security guarantees, this is within US power. No one is forcing the United States to offer NATO membership to Ukraine. Indeed, if this is taken off the table, I think the Russian would prefer to have that agreement with the US and NATO, because Ukraine has previously had this in their constitution, that they were supposed to be neutral. Next year, someone new can come along and they can change it all over again. So it's not worth much if it just comes from the Ukrainians. And indeed, this is what the game that NATO played. They say, our doors are open, we expand, it's nothing we can do about it. And essentially they passed over the conflict, which was one of European security architecture between NATO and Russia. And they said, well, we have to expand. It's, our hands are tied. And then essentially saying to the Russians, this is between you and Ukraine then. So if you want to stop NATO, then essentially you have to take it up with Ukraine. And this is what contributed to this war. The only thing that the Americans don't really control is this territory swap and or territorial concessions. And I think that this is where it can become very tricky, and it's also can be seen as humiliating for the Europeans because Europe bet everything on this war. So, but there's a deal possible there as well. But I think for Trump now to just cut off all the weapons, that means he's given up completely on finding a settlement. On the other hand, it might just be that this is like Alex suggested, that there's some incrementalism going on here. Because if we go back only a few months, keep in mind that Zelensky didn't even want to talk to the Russians. They refused to meet them for negotiations. Everything was off the table. Look how far it's come along. They're sitting down, they're talking. It's pretty much been put forward now to both Europeans and the Ukrainians. There won't be any NATO. The US will likely play a very small or no role in security guarantees, and Ukraine is going to have to accept giving up territories. This is a huge shift, and it comes gradual. So I think this is probably this kind of incrementalism or salami tactics that Trump has to do in order to bridge, two sides which are very, very far apart. But I don't think it's going to make it, though. I'm very pessimistic in terms of the. He could go to the Russians. He told them what I want to hear. He went to the Europeans and the Ukrainians. He was very ambiguous. Like, he took NATO off the table, but then he toyed a bit with, maybe security guarantees, which could mean anything. That could be just a change in the Russian constitution to, boots on the ground. So this is a huge. It's not really defined. But if he wants the Ukrainians and the Russians to sit down together, or Putin and Zelensky, and sign something, that's a very difficult thing to sell, because all those ambiguous things he's been saying can have to be very, very specific. And if he's going to push anyone, he can't push the Russians, because the Russians, first of all, they see this as an existential threat. They're not going to move, and also they don't have to move because they're winning. The alternative to a peace deal is victory. The Ukrainians and Europeans are under great pressure because they're losing this war. And so if he wants to put the pressure somewhere, it's going to have to be on them, and cutting off the financing, that's the way to go. But I think, he might still be a possibility. I mean, he brought them much closer. If he's going to get them over the finishing lines, there's going to have to be some big threats coming. But it's all premised on the idea that he wants to actually end the war, and as opposed to just outsourcing it to the Europeans.
Yeah, because those are the two big choices, right? Yeah, Alex.
Matt, if I may, just on the question of supplying weapons and all this, it doesn't change the equation at all, and it's not, it's not obvious whether this is even desirable by the Russians, because if the Ukrainians get completely cut off, no more weapons, no more ammunition, no more intelligence sharing, nothing, the war ends right away there. The Russian strategy is to destroy by attrition the Ukrainian armed forces. So one of the four goals of the Russian special military operation is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And how do you do that? You have to destroy them in the battlefield. So as long as they keep fighting, you keep destroying these troops. When they stop fighting, they pull back probably to Western Ukraine, and they remain intact. And now you no longer have. Once they stop fighting, you're no longer able to destroy them. The fighting stops. This is not necessarily in Russia's interests either. For as long as these brigades of far-right Azov battalion type forces exist, they remain a risk. So it is plausible that the Russians want them destroyed, and that they actually want them to continue fighting so long as they are a viable fighting force.
That's an interesting point. Okay, fair enough. You mentioned that there's certain things that the European heads of state are unwilling to do because of needing to save face. They've put so much of their identities and propaganda and everything into this idea that Russia is the new global devil that needs to be stopped, and Ukraine is the battlefield to stop the devil from taking over the world. So, they don't want to humiliate themselves by having to pull back. But then again, these heads of state seem to have no problem leaning into humiliation, as there was this ritual that happened as well just after Putin had left the United States, and the world was privy to such images as this, featuring pretty much all of the dominant heads of state with their hands held, looking like little, scolded children. Everybody has seen these images now. What was behind this in your minds? Because I don't think anything really came out of it that served the interests of those European leaders. I don't know what the strategy was going in. I don't know if they literally powwowed and got on the phone saying, "Hey, let's do this emergency meet up and just go and grovel at the feet of somebody who some of them have already called daddy." What do you guys think? It's ridiculous. So what was behind it? What was the outcome? What was discussed in your assessment beyond the simple words? But what was really going on in the minds of these people, if there are minds there? Sorry, Alex, I'll throw it at you first.
Well, the thing that surprised me there is that I thought, going into this meeting, I thought that we would get more out of the body language of the participants than we would out of anything that they declared at the end, because the declarations were always going to be kind of face-saving platitudes, and the body language tells you everything you need to know. But I expected Zelensky to kind of look like death. And Zelensky was maybe the only one of these 8 people who kind of looked relaxed and even cheerful at moments. And it was the 7 leaders of European nations who looked like death. And so I think that the show came to an end. That there's, without the United States, they are not able to do anything. And the United States is no longer supporting them. And I think that the key here is providing the security guarantee. And now these words have become almost meaningless because they're being thrown around almost without regard to what the words actually mean. The security guarantee means that if Western forces in Ukraine come under attack, the United States has to go and back them up. So, what they've been trying to achieve already since February, since Donald Trump took over, is they've been trying to get a commitment by the United States that if they send their troops, which they called peacekeeper force, reassurance force, I guess the tripwire force was a little bit too revealing, So they were, remember the Brits and the French were going to put together this coalition of the willing. Remember the very February, March, when they had these emergency meetings in Paris and in London, and they were figuring out how they were going to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. And I think the whole point was for those troops to come under fire by the Russians, and then the Americans, having given their security guarantee, to say, like, right now our allies have come to under fire by the evil Russians, and now we're coming to the aid of our allies. And then you get what you've always wanted to get. You get like World War III, a clash of collective united West, Article 5 type stuff against Russia. And Trump said, we're not doing it. It's over. And I think that this became now undeniable. I think that there's going to be a change of government in Kyiv. This is, I think, why Zelensky is relaxed as he appears to be, because I think he got a golden parachute from Trump, that he'll be able to extricate himself from there, and that maybe he got a guarantee from maybe Trump obtained a guarantee from Putin that they will not go after him, that they will just let him slip away, and so that's Zelensky out. I've seen in the news now that the British are talking about helping Ukraine hold the elections, because you know how British are very committed to democracy. They want to make sure that the elections are fair and balanced and correct, and that every vote is counted correctly and so forth. So they're already very anxious to insert themselves into the democratic process. The whole objective of this fight is whether the government in Kyiv is going to pivot back into the Moscow's orbit, or whether it's going to remain aligned with the West. That's the most important thing at this moment, because Russians are not obsessed with territory. Who controls which city, who controls which oblast. Is it going to paint it red, or is it going to be painted blue or yellow, whatever? They don't care. They care who is sitting in Kyiv and what are their loyalties. So the Russians are very comfortable with recreating a type of Belarus state on whatever's remained of Ukraine. That's what they want. So they want like a buffer between NATO and Russia, and they want a friendly cooperative state like Belarus is with Russia. That's what they're driving at. And so that doesn't need to be resolved by the force of arms. That has to be resolved in the next elections. And I wager that depending on who takes power after Zelensky is going to determine this outcome. And I would say that if it's Zaluzhny, then the Russians have won.
Mm-hmm.
Zaluzhny, who's currently the ambassador,
Ukraine's
ambassador to London.
Yeah. Okay. Glenn, do you think that Europe right now is obviously in an economically pitiful place, and it's getting more pitiful by the day? The whole transatlantic system is really fragile. But there has been discussion about creating more of an sort of a military sort of World Bank type of infrastructure, some mechanism that is already, I think there's a lot of advance in having sort of solidified this is some mechanism that European nation, well, not European nations, the European Commission, I suppose, can take out a loan and then distribute it to countries to help specifically provide for the military investments that will go into Ukraine outside of their annual budgets, outside of their fiscal budgets. That's obviously an idea. I don't know if they've got the means of doing that when they're self-mutilating so much. But do you think that there is there any sanity amongst European elites right now to pull back to a more sane strategy? Or do you think that they're going to double down on this sort of thinking and take up the proposition to increase, NATO spending to 5% with these different shenanigans, or maybe even open up like a second or a third or a fourth front in these target like weaker countries on the perimeter of Eastern Europe, like Serbia? We've seen evidence that they've been targeted for destabilization. signs of color revolution style destabilizations are evident in some of the protests in Serbia, and we have things in Bosnia Herzegovina and these other regions, Moldova. There's been evidence of certain destabilizing influences. Do you think that that's a real danger, or do you see sanity feasibly coming to the surface and changing course to something more competent?
I don't see the sanity just yet, but there are efforts, I think, to open other fronts. Indeed, in Georgia, for example, this is what they've complained about, or the Prime Minister of Georgia arguing that the United States been trying to have a regime change in order to open up a second front, that is to use the Georgians as cannon fodder to put further pressure on the Russians. So I don't think that this has been given up. And indeed, for all of Trump's talk about peace, he's also putting pressure other places. He's creating a huge debacle now with the Indians just to try to force India to turn its back on Russia. It doesn't appear to be working, and indeed backfiring in a big way. But no, I just don't see any wider efforts in terms of changing the major the roots of the conflict. And I think the Europeans, you have to appreciate how much they bet on this, because for Europe, the partnership with the United States is everything they know. This is what brought stability in Europe after the Second World War. And then, of course, the Cold War is over. And then the Europeans, they have an ambition to essentially link themselves up to the US unipolar moment. That is to have the global hegemony of the political West that is standing on two pillars, the US and the European Union as equal partners. This is kind of the goal. We saw this in the 1990s, this so-called burden sharing. The US would, he can knock down countries. Europeans would do the peacekeeping thereafter. So the talk was the US would make the dinner and the Europeans would do the dishes. And the US focus on this transatlantic partnership was kind of key to this. Now you see suddenly the world becoming multipolar. How are most countries in the world reacting to this? Well, if the world is multipolar, you want to start to diversify your foreign partners, that is economic partners. And this is what the Turks, the Arabs, Indians, I mean, the whole world is doing this as a way of elevating their own political autonomy as well as prospering more economically. The Europeans have done exactly the opposite, because for them, they see in a multipolar world that the Americans might pack up and move to Asia instead. And indeed, this is something been expressed since Obama's day, this pivot to Asia. Well, if you're going to pivot to somewhere, you're going to have to pivot away from somewhere. And this is primarily Europe. So when we're losing the war in Ukraine, this is the logical way for the Americans to respond to this is to pack up their bags, dump this mess on the Europeans, and again, not just pull out of Ukraine, but pull out of Europe as well. So suddenly the Europeans went from a dream of collective hegemony side by side with the Americans to suddenly a multipolar world where the Europeans aren't even a pole of power anymore, because they're hoping the Americans will stay. So they're trying to elevate their own values, show their loyalty. So they are cutting themselves off from the Russians, Chinese, coming to Trump, calling him daddy. Even the last economic deal they made, which was a disaster, even the EU recognized this was a horrible disaster. It was a terrible deal. But as the EU said, well, it's more than economics. We want the Americans to stay here. We have to keep the family together. Daddy can't leave. This is kind of the logic. So all of this is tied up with the Ukraine, because if the Russians could be defeated in Ukraine, then the Americans could stay. If the Russians win, the Americans leave, Europe becomes a geopolitical black hole almost. So there's a lot at stake. But of course, no one explained properly what it means to defeat Russia, world's largest nuclear power, which considers this to be an existential threat. I haven't seen a good plan for what exactly this would entail. So I think the Europeans dug a big hole for themselves, and they don't know how to get out of this.
Yeah, that's an understatement. The specifics that it reminded me of an episode of South Park that I watched when I was still in high school with the Underpants Gnomes. Have you guys ever seen that one? Little characters on this cartoon. It's a crude cartoon, but the characters, a bunch of kids in a little town in some part of the US, discover that there are these underpants gnomes that are at night coming into little kids' rooms and stealing their underpants and bringing them to a headquarters in an underground James Bond villain kind of lair. And they finally come up with a scheme to track them down, and they follow them into their headquarters and confront them with these millions and millions of underpants, and when confronted, the gnomes are forced to reveal their overarching scheme, which has a threefold agenda. And they pull out a little PowerPoint and they say, well, step 1 is collect underpants. Step 2, step 3, profit. And everyone's like, well, what's step 2? And nobody thought it through. Like, well, what is step 2? There's this big gaping hole.
Matt, may I ask you a question?
Oh, yeah.
Because, one of the things that kind of, we talked about the United States pivoting between being the armed force of the empire to becoming going back to its Republican roots and being an independent nation. And one of the big moments in this was after World War II, when FDR died or was assassinated. We're not entirely sure, right? And then Truman comes to power, but it seems that this transition of power was prepared because Truman's original vice president was Henry Wallace, right? And I think that a bit more about that, because Truman, with Truman in power, the United States completely pivoted to the British orbit, and then we had the CIA was created, and the United States was starting to be shaped as a national security state, and the NATO was created, and the Truman Doctrine kind of followed, dovetailed with the Churchill's designating the Soviet Union as the enemy of the West, and on and on and on. But the fact, the thing that I think is very interesting is that I think this came from London, the pressure to replace Henry Wallace with Harry Truman. And Harry Truman, from what I can tell, didn't have any idea where he was in space and time, and it was a very ignorant person. And so he went along with shall we drop two nuclear bombs on Japan? Well, okay, fine, signed off on that. Shall we create the CIA? Okay. Let's create NATO. Fine, great idea. Let's, our ally with whom we fought to defeat Hitler and the Nazis just like the other day, let's designate them as our greatest enemy. So the question is, how did that switcheroo come about? Wallace out, Truman in.
There's an article written from, it seems like there were some shenanigans in the 1944 Democratic National Convention where the selection of the vice president was voted upon by delegates. And it seems that there was a conspiracy, but I didn't do the deep dive. I know I've read an essay that was published about in 2013, which I'll dig up, but FDR wasn't happy. That being said, Wallace's general competence is also compromised a little bit. It would have been much preferable, of course. He never would have permitted the Cold War to happen, but there were certain. He was compromised intellectually, I think, in ways that would have not necessarily been beneficial either. But it would have put at least many more patriots into a position of responsibility. Paul Robeson, for example, might have even been, was even offered to become vice president to Wallace when he was running for president in 1948. And many people who did understand the Wall Street London axis behind Hitler, who were in the OSS, would not have been purged. So certainly it would have been very different. But nice try to turn the tables on me, as I'm the host of this show. And I saw what you did there.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I think I think it's a relevant episode, and I'm very vague about it. I know more about these things in in finer detail, but because from that point on, because while FDR was alive, he and Stalin were kind of inclined to develop the relations between the United States and the Soviet Union on a friendly, constructive, cooperative basis. But this was completely derailed by the British. And, Stalin was completely convinced that FDR was actually poisoned and killed by, as he said, the Churchill gang. And, there is some merit to that, and it was never investigated. And I think that FDR's, Stalin's envoy, who I forget who it was, another known.
That was Molotov, the foreign minister.
Molotov, yeah, he was not allowed to see FDR's body after he died.
Yeah,
and
there was never an autopsy, so
there was never,
exactly.
So it was a very suspicious death. And from that moment on, the United States kind of completely pivots away from those friendly, constructive relations with the Soviet Union to Cold War.
Yeah.
And so for the next, 80 years, the United States is the leader in the Cold War confrontation between the two nuclear powers, and the world is brought to the brink of a nuclear war. And what we're experiencing today is basically kind of the consequences of all that. But it took a turn. At that point, it absolutely took a turn that didn't make sense. It did not serve the interests of the United States. It did not serve the interests of the Soviet Union or of the Russian people. There never would have been a NATO if that turn wasn't made. There never would have been a Soviet bloc either. And we would never have come to the edge of the abyss of the nuclear annihilation.
Absolutely.
But the relations between Russia and the United States kind of have a natural tendency to be constructive and friendly. I think that Russia and the United States are natural allies, and preventing this alliance, preventing this friendship has been on the top of the to-do list of the British Empire for pretty much 200 years. And I think that...
And it's true. And Wallace and Molotov had negotiations underway that were published for the building of a highway between Russia and Alaska along the Bering Strait.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the part of the history that now comes full circle. And it's not, the fact that Trump is pursuing it is not really so unusual. It's almost like history taking off again from where it was artificially interrupted and then went into a pathological loop.
I guess there's definitely striking patterns, absolutely, that resonates with my heart when I hear you say that. And I guess for me, it's just, I have my trepidation because I still see, while I see the same patterns in the beautiful composition of like a correcting of the errors of history that were made possible through the sabotage, the assassinations of people like JFK, of FDR, of Lincoln. There's this other thing that I can't seem to quite resolve amidst this, which deals with this transhumanist cult, which has been incubating inside of the US for quite some time. And a lot of this is the manifestation of the theosophical movements. If you look at the origins of transhumanism, the origins of Silicon Valley, it was seeded by followers of Madame Blavatsky in California, who were trying to manifest this crazy idea of a sixth root race to take charge of the self-conscious evolution of the species in a very eugenics way. These are all eugenicists. This is the Valerian brothers that seeded Silicon Valley, that quickly merged with the military-industrial complex under Teddy Roosevelt. Even it was already beginning to be incubated and grow in this nasty way. And though that was put down a little bit, we saw it emerge in a vicious way with the Vietnam War, with Lansdale, Allen Dulles, all of these things grow and grow. And I've never seen anything really temper that in a direct fashion. And if anything, when I look at things like I mentioned earlier, Palantir's operations that emerged out of this, or Oracle AI, that's using sort of a little tip of the hat to the ancient oracles that shaped the geopolitical topography of the ancient world. Every king and every general had to go and pay money to the local oracle at Delphi or the Pythian oracle in order to be told whether we go to war, whether we make peace, what do we do? The oracles controlled a lot, and the priesthoods, this mystery cult priesthood that interpreted the oracles, had a huge amount of influence. So the fact that we have things like that, Stargate, and that Palantir has clients of this global surveillance architecture that include Canada, the UK, Germany, France, Denmark, Norway, Israel, on top of the USA and NATO, and it seems to have a lot of influence even within the Trump network. I don't know if that's been subdued to the proper healthy business interests of what FDR was working with when he was dealing with the more healthy, the people who realize that it's more in your financial benefit as an elite of America, as somebody who has a CEO or whatever. It is more in your business interest to not kill your enemies, or no, sorry, not kill your clients. and sorry, big difference, or not burn the world in nuclear war. That was competent. I can believe that. In today's world, I just don't see that I'm not convinced that has been subdued to common sense yet. I fear that something else might be lurking about, which is still, it has a similar topography to what FDR was dealing with, but it's different in a dangerous way. That's my trepidation and concern. I don't know if you guys feel my concern, or if I'm just a paranoid conspiracy theorist who's too far down the rabbit hole.
No, leave that to you, Alex.
Okay. Well, no, I don't think you're paranoid, Matt, because these things are real. They are happening. But I think that, in a strange way, I think all these constructs are very fragile because they depend on people managing them, maintaining them, pushing them forward. And in order for people to do that, they need to believe in the mission. And, one thing that I've noticed and that I've written about in the past is, for example, when the United States created this drone assassinations program, the biggest problem that they faced was a huge turnover among the pilots. It took them a while to train the pilots. It cost a lot of money. And then, they thought like, wow, look at this phenomenal thing. We have these pilots sitting in Texas with joysticks killing people in Afghanistan and all over the place. Isn't that wonderful? Well, the problem started occurring because these pilots would say like, I think I saw a child there. And then they would ask like, who did I kill? What was this? Who did I kill? And they would tell them, just follow your orders. Don't worry about it. We'll tell you where to shoot and who to kill. And so these pilots started resigning in droves. So it was a huge problem. And then they the Department of Defense talked to Google, and then Google said like, well, okay, we can solve this problem. We'll program AI solutions to the targeting. So the AI is going to take over the drones, and you're not going to have to be training up all these human pilots. And then the engineers in Google got the wind of this, and they were like, hey, we didn't sign up for this. We're not doing this. We're not writing code to be killing people around the world. And then they drafted a letter to the management of Google saying, if you're going to do this, thank you very much. You don't need us, and we don't need you. We're not going to be doing this. And then there was like a huge wave of resignations from Google. And then this spread to like, there's some kind of a umbrella organization of tech developers of Silicon Valley, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what it is, but it's people from Google and Amazon and Apple and so forth. And they all got on board of this. And so there was a name of this. There was this project had a name. Anyhow, it hit a major snag, and it became a real problem for the Department of Defense. So if you can convince people that they have very, very evil enemies out there that need to be eliminated, or else they're going to, these hordes of barbarians are going to bust the citadel and kill your children and rape your women and enslave you, then people are going to pull together and do all these things. if they think that you're doing something evil, they're going to compromise you. They're going to compromise you deliberately. And then everything you built, all these tools and weapons that you were going to wield and turn them against your enemy, there's a real possibility that they're going to be turned around against you, and that the whole juggernaut is going to dissipate. So, let's see what happens. Trump has been in office for 7 months now. These things have been built up together for decades. We need sunlight on these things. We need to see what is going on. I think that the events that are happening now in this world are drawing a lot of these machinations and a lot of these conspiracies into the light, and people are understanding what is going on and what was being asked of them. And I doubt that they're going to cooperate with that. And this is particularly vulnerable to competent people, because in tech development, you usually have, the genius, the thing they call super programmers, the engineers that without whom the whole thing doesn't quite work. People who can, hold the map of the whole system in their head so they can manage the project and direct development. And these people are usually so far and few between that they can go anywhere and get a 7-figures job. Okay. So if they say, like, what, you want me to develop a targeting software? No, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go to this Chinese company that's been offering me $3 million a year. So they don't have to cooperate. And so you're going to be stuck with mediocrities. So the whole thing, people have the impression that you write a piece of code and then that thing works, and from there they draw a straight line to Skynet and the Terminators, and that's all coming our way. No, this is all kind of like a Sisyphus. You have to like push and push and work and work. These things don't refine themselves. These things don't maintain themselves. Code is extremely sensitive even to documentation. If you write a code, you didn't document it correctly, your original programmer becomes incapacitated, leaves the company or dies or something. The next person who comes in is going to have no idea what the hell this code is doing unless it's properly documented. So all of these things are becoming, okay, AI solves a few things, but you still need competent people to hold the whole thing together and drive it towards fulfilling its objective. What I'm trying to explain is the reason why much more than 90% of all tech-based projects never attain their objectives. They never fulfill their objectives. It's hard. And people really need to, it's not, you can't make it happen with money. You can throw hundreds of millions of dollars on people. They might not be able to do it. And so when we hear about Palantir and all of these things, the fear is usually the result of us extrapolating this to the completion of these projects' missions and objectives. But that's a very, very hard uphill struggle, and they will fail unless they can keep people convinced that they are doing something good for humanity.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I really hope that sociopathic tendencies and garbage, there are certain people, as we've seen, no shortage of that, managing the Zionist project, who somehow have rationalized that the Untermenschen can and even should be sacrificed for the sake of an Übermenschen idea of a greater good in some perverse definition of what that means, or that there's redemption through sacrificing other people for whatever ambition. We've seen a lot of that throughout history, where people can be mentally distorted to come into this unnatural state of mind when associated with political or scientific power that can do a lot of bad. Like dropping nuclear bombs on
Yeah,
innocent people in
but
Japan, right? So my hope is that those types of people are kept far away from political levers of power projection in the context
yeah.
of what we're talking about, as you
Okay,
pointed out.
I get. I think I understand your point,
Mm,
Matt. But there's a huge difference
mm,
between pulling triggers on guns and blowing things up,
mhm,
and building a hugely complex, sophisticated technical systems. You don't need particularly skilled people to shoot and blow things up, but you need very, very highly educated, prepared technical people, experienced technical people to be developing these highly complex systems. It's a I would just
like
suggest
like the
that,
Manhattan Project. I mean, it had a lot of very technically proficient, brilliant minds
yeah,
involved
that's
in the
true.
Manhattan Project.
That's
Yeah,
true.
sorry. Well, look, I think that we've laid out a lot of parameters shaping the future. There's so many questions I didn't get. Do you guys have like 15 more minutes, or do we have to
Of
shift
course.
gears?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I know you're too busy, man. I don't want to drag too much of your time out.
No, it's okay. It's a
Uh,
Sunday.
okay, all right, cool. All right. Well, look, the tokenization of the economy. I had presumed personally that the economy was all like we've been sitting on a derivatives bubble for a long time. It's been just inflated and inflated into hyperinflationary proportions. It was only a question of when, not if, it's going to blow out. I think some of it has been gamed out by certain figures that wanted to take advantage of the chaos that would ensue. And I thought that the idea of transitioning to a tokenized economy would happen after the fire, but I'm increasingly getting the sense that there is possibly a move before the collapse to shift into a more tokenized economy with different types of cryptocurrencies, digitized currencies, and things like that that are even being accepted by the Federal Reserve. This might become more of a dominant thing. Do you think that this idea might actually provide a solution to some of the systemic problems in combination with global investments from, as you pointed out, I know, Alex, you and Glenn have both talked about this, the idea that Trump is really emphatic upon getting international investments from Japan, from South Korea, from Europe, from everywhere, maybe even Russia, maybe taking unfrozen or frozen assets and turning that into investment capital for the building up of America's hard, like real economy. Do you think that there is a way to combine these things in a manner that will avoid the type of calamitous blowout a la Weimar hyperinflation that many people were anticipating, and instead transition a healthy, clean economy? Maybe slowly, maybe fast, I don't know. Or do you think that that's a pipe dream that is unrealistic at this point of imperial rot? I'll ask both you guys this question. Whoever wants to take it up, go for it.
I don't think. I think it's too late to do much about the economy. I do think that the plan or the desire for Trump is to reorganize the international economy because it's no longer working for the United States. Keep in mind that the economic system put up after World War II, the United States had a very privileged position. It had all the leading technologies. It had the dominant industries in the world, essentially then being the factory of the world. It ensured control over all the major maritime transportation corridors. Oh, by the way, also the natural resources, setting up the right partnerships in the Middle East, getting access to what it needed. It set itself up in a very privileged position in terms of the main development banks, and ensured the use of the US dollar. And later on, of course, the SWIFT payment system, putting the United States at the center of everything, and allowed the US to a large extent to gain trust by presenting this as a collective good. So that's the foundation of being a benign hegemon. But I think over time the economy became too rent-seeking, became too financialized. And if you look at it now, the Chinese is evidently taking over a lot of the technological dominance, not just with the computing power. They have also solved the energy problem, which is a key component of this AI race. They don't produce anything anymore. The United States, that's a problem, by the way, with Trump's tariffs. If there's no domestic industry to actually take over. The transportation corridors, again, this is what the Chinese have been countering with the Belt and Road Initiative. You see other Eurasian powers having something similar. There's now alternative banks. Countries are looking for other alternatives to get around the dollar. SWIFT is pushed aside. So at the moment, well, we see the United States is spiraling out of control. Its debt is unsustainable, and also to prevent the rise of rival powers, it has to weaponize all dependence on the United States. So it can seize Iranian tankers, can steal your gold, steal the Russian sovereign funds. There's no more rules. Trying to prevent the tech rise of China by cutting off its access, essentially weaponizing all supply chains. So the whole world now is looking at this, and they're looking for ways to decouple more from the United States, at least diversify. And this is the main game in town. And all of the efforts by the United States now, by, for example, threatening countries in BRICS who try to reduce dependence on the dollar, then they will get punished. And how can they be punished? Well, the way they depend on the dollar. So it's very counterproductive, all it's proving to countries. And I think India is now the key example. This threat to India, fall in line, turn on the Russians. No one's doing this. The only ones, as I mentioned before, are the Europeans. They are falling in line, and they're willing to harm themselves. But if you give in to the Americans on this, you agree, okay, if you're India, we're going to stop buying Russian oil. We're going to accept a bit of an economic hit to India, but at least America will be happy with us. No, of course not. The Americans will be back tomorrow. They will ask for something similar against China. They will ask for a boycott of Iran. And every time you give a little inch to the United States, you make sure that you're less able to diversify your economic partnerships, and you get trapped into this very asymmetrical, interdependent relation where this excessive dependence on the US, and the US can begin to dictate all the terms of agreements and also extract political concessions. And soon you'll have a vassal status, and you will become the new Europe. And I think much of the world is looking at this, trying to avoid it. Anyways, long story short, no, I don't think there's many ways for the US to turn this around. It looks like they're transitioning a bit in towards a tribute economy now that is using its power to not just prevent the rise of rivals, but also extracting concessions out of allies. So you hear them talking about Taiwan. They should move all the semiconductors industries to the United States. Let's get our hands on Greenland, the Panama Canal. Give us a better deal, otherwise we'll seize it. And this is kind of the logic around the world. And I think it's temporary, because all this, it would have worked if this was the 90s, but now there's alternatives, and countries are now making huge efforts to reduce dependence on the US. So it looks like a desperate last effort.
Yeah, plus there's the question of Venezuela, that there's like 4,000 US troops now deployed. And I know Maduro has a $50 million bounty on his head, and he's mobilized 40,000 militia members from Venezuela to defend Venezuela from some supposed possible attack, which concerned me. And Venezuela is sitting on a lot of oil as well. So those are points that I'm concerned by. But Alex, what do you think about a lot of these things that Glenn just said?
Well, it's all very, very interesting. With regards to Venezuela, I just have to point out that you're not gonna invade Venezuela with 4,000 troops and a small fleet. It's Venezuela would be extremely difficult to invade if you wanted to invade it militarily, because you can land troops on the coast, but to get to Caracas you have to cross the Avila Mountains, which is Caracas itself is on 1,000 meter above the sea level, and this mountain goes much higher. You'd have to break through. You have one road going up there. You would have to break through practically tropical rainforest at steep incline. This is not a meaningful gesture.
Could the fifth columnists, though, that were supporting Guaido still be there and be drooling over the $50 million as incentive?
Maybe some of them, but you wouldn't be able to count on that. So
okay.
This is another one of Trump's typical tossing a stun grenade to divert from something else that's important, everybody goes crazy and their heads explode. But I guarantee you 4,000 troops is not a gesture to go and invade Venezuela. That just doesn't. I mean, it's beyond ridiculous. It's completely a psyop. With respect to the economic issues of money and the dollar, I think it seems to me that a lot of what Trump is doing is actually pushing people away from the dollar, in fact. And I wonder if it might not be deliberate. When Trump came into the office, €1 cost $1.03. Okay, today it's $1.17. So the dollar lost about 14%. What does that mean? That means that the American-made goods in Europe are 14% cheaper, and that the European goods sold in the United States are 14% more expensive. So that improves the competitive position of the United States. Trump does seem to be okay. So it's been understood since 1971, the powers that be understood that the dollar was doomed. It's not sustainable. It's going to zero. It's a fiat currency. It is going to zero. It's only a question of time. And so the way it's going to go to zero is through inflation. Inflation is incidentally a good way to default on your debts, because the United States has $37 trillion in public debts, and that's just the federal government. So one way to deal with that debt, which is completely unpayable, and that's just the federal debt, the government. If you take the total credit market debt, so public, financial, businesses and individuals, everybody in the economy, it's more than $100 trillion. That's absurd. That's preposterous. It's completely unpayable. So if you push the dollar down the inflation ravine to destroy itself, you inflate away your debts. You're going to be able to pay all those debts with worthless dollars. So there is an argument for
it'd be like a debt jubilee almost in a weird way without calling it a jubilee. I said it would be like a debt jubilee in a weird way. You wouldn't call it that, but you could simply say, okay, toilet paper sells for $1 trillion now, so we can just pay.
It's not a forgiveness of debt, but it's a default. It's a basically. Inflation is a way of defaulting on your debt. So you inflate it away, you paid back with worthless dollars, and you say hey, here's your $37 trillion. You can fill a tank of gas with it, but we're now
okay.
The debts are cleared, and then you introduce a new currency. What you want to do meanwhile is you want to ramp up production in your economy, because you can withstand the destruction of the currency so long as your economy produces food, the basic goods, the supermarket shelves. There's food there. There's medicines in pharmacies. There's gas in the gas pumps and so forth, and so people can survive. People can live. You're not dealing with like the 1920s style depression where people go hungry and you have 10 million people die of famine. You get these hyperinflationary experience like we had in former Yugoslavia. They were just pumping money into the system, and yes, we all ended up losing savings. People who were on fixed income suffered, but there was food in the supermarket. There was medicines in the pharmacies. There was gasoline and diesel on gas pumps. And so life went on. And then at a certain point, you transition to a new currency and you clear the deck completely and you start from zero. So if I were running the fiscal and monetary policy for the United States, I would do that, because there is no way to pay off $37 trillion of debt without inflation.
Yes. Yeah, that we definitely. I think I like what you said, and that's a good point.
And then,
And definitely,
sorry,
no,
just to
sorry, go on.
finish,
Yeah,
antagonizing China, antagonizing India, antagonizing everybody around, threatening these sanctions and tariffs, that's actually the effect of that is actually what Trump's been wanting to do for a long time anyway. He wants protective tariffs to make sure that that the United States shifts back to being an industrial economy. And part of the big beautiful bill is a provision where, if you invest into a productive, let's say into some kind of an industry in the United States where you produce something, so like a productive industry, you get to write off the whole entire sum of that investment in the first year. So you
yeah.
don't have to amortize it over 5 or
And
10 years or whatever
I
it is.
noticed that. Yeah, that's like the
You write
JFK.
it off straight away. So that's a tremendous incentive for people to say, like, all right,
Yeah.
let's build stuff that makes stuff.
Yeah, and that's similar to the JFK industrial tax incentive that he had set up in 41 to 43, to basically make it financially more viable to invest in the real economy instead of speculating
Instead
on
of speculating, exactly.
transient, casino type of activities on the stock markets. You want to invest in something real, but you want to give people the freedom to gamble if they want to be stupid. It's the land of freedom, but you want to make sure that that's a lot less profitable than investing in something that's going to also benefit the nation. So I do see that partially there as well. But I guess on that point, looking at the history of protectionism when it was used well and when it was used abusively, my concern is that when it was, I'm, me, I'm very much pro protectionist. And every time that the U.S. has benefited and grown industrially throughout history, it's always when the protective tariff was applied in opposition to this British British idea of free trade that says, everybody must open their borders for the flooding of cheap goods to keep them cash cropping. That's the way the British Empire was able to grow. But the British Empire always had protectionism for itself. So that's how they were able to keep a monopoly on industrial products or industrial output, and could keep everybody as a subdued sort of victim. And my concern now is just when I look at some of the deals that have been made on South Korea or Japan, a lot of that is that these goods coming into the U.S. face tariffs, but the goods that are coming in from the U.S. into these countries are not facing any tariff. And the tariffs seem to work best when everybody participates equally in doing tariffs to benefit their local economies and develop full spectrum economies accordingly, and not just one player the way the British Empire was able to misuse it. So my fear is I just see too much of the British Empire's approach to tariffs applied when I look at how Trump has been promoting this to many countries around the world. I don't know if you guys find fault in or my concern there, Glenn or Alex. Do you guys see that at all, or?
Yeah, no, I kind of fall in the same category. I tend to like the economic nationalism of everyone from Alexander Hamilton, Henry Clay, the Friedrich List. So I can appreciate the historical role of the use of tariffs, but this is to give some advantage, temporary tariffs until some domestic industries reach maturity, so they're able to compete more on international markets. I think this is not a bad way to go, but it's not the way I see Trump using though. He's using it more as almost as a political tool, or indeed sometimes just for coercion. So I'm not. I would have liked to see him do something quite different, but it is true though that the British, they had their subsidies, their tariffs until they built up the economic competitiveness in order to be more competitive than anyone else. And the whole logic then, if you have the dominant industries which are mature, which means that they're high quality and low cost, what do you want to do? Well, then you shift to free trade policies, because now you can saturate all foreign markets, and that's what the British back in the days very openly said. If the Americans, the Europeans, they have their infant industries that is low quality and high cost, they can't compete against ours, which are high quality and low cost. So in the free market, they won't industrialize. They will become excessively dependent on Britain, and this will be converted into political influence. So, as I said, the British Parliament back in those days, they will be like colonies to us, except we don't have to bother governing them. And this was the whole point behind the American system, the recognition that you need to have some industrial independence in order to have political autonomy. And but this is kind of this is the point, that the whole free trade issue. I think this is a good time for the United States to walk it back a bit as an ideology which can't be challenged, because the United States can't compete with China. This is a problem. If they can't compete, what are they going to do? At some point, they either have to have some protectionist efforts in order to shore up some strategic industries, or they're going to have to accept that free trade would make them excessively dependent on only China, and China would begin to have too much power, more than America would be comfortable with. But again, I think therefore that a reasonable argument can be made to pursue these tariffs and these other ways of pulling a bit away from this globalization initiative over the past few decades, which was premised on American leadership. But I'm not seeing it done in the way I would have. I think would actually work.
Well, it's possible that some collusion, like Alex has been alluding to, has been going on. We know that there's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit's going to be happening next week. Xi and Modi will be meeting. The foreign minister, Russia and India are integrating ever more. Iran's a member. So we definitely have a consolidation of civilizational states, increasing their cooperation on every level. Space lunar bases powered by nuclear reactors being developed by Russia and China, forcing NASA to announce their own thing. So it's possible that there might be some subtle collusion, maybe, hopefully, from networks in or around Trump's network who are that want this outcome, hopefully. Maybe not. Maybe this is, but I don't know. Alex, so based on what Glenn said and what I was concerned about with the use or misuse of protective tariffs, do you think that South Korea, Japan, other countries are just being challenged right now to be more strong in the face of these types of deals, so that they use their national power to apply their own protective tariffs, and they're just failing the test so far by remaining kind of satrapy? Or do you think that there's something else going on that's a bit more nefarious?
I'm not really certain, and I think that a lot of the policies are being implemented covertly, because you're kind of taking your negotiating position, using your leverage to improve your own position. And the United States is deep in the hole. So part of what they have to do is they have to take advantage of their trading partners, but they have to do it in a kind of a subtle way. And one thing that Trump is not really good at is being subtle. He's being bombastic and borderline vulgar about the whole thing. I think he's even needlessly antagonizing his partners. I think it's coming to a point where everybody has to go back to the drawing board and decide what they want to do. And if the United States is overly abusive in their relationship, well, the whole point of a multipolar world is that you're no longer so dependent on the United States. So you can say, like, well, fine, we can't deal with the Americans. We're going to be developing our relations with the Indians, with the Chinese, with the Russians, with the Iranians, with Brazil, and so forth, and the world will get on. But I think the way I look at all these things is that we are still looking for solutions within the same paradigm that is itself very much not a, something that we should question. Does the whole economic system have to grow in order to produce more and more crap, in order to dump it on somebody else, in order to gain your current, to have a current account surplus, or cause the others to have a current account deficit? I don't know that. I think that the whole economic system can be organized in a completely different way, and so long as people's needs are covered, so long as people are comfortable, you can direct a lot of economic development to things that don't necessarily change the GDP. Let's say that they don't show up in accounting. If you build a cathedral, that means something that can be interesting for a community to do, or if you build pyramids, but it doesn't go into hyper production of crap. And writing operas, ballets, art, investing in architecture, there are many, you've spoken about setting lunar stations and space exploration and all this. All of these things are not productive in the way that bolsters the GDP growth.
Yeah, a monetarist will never understand why these things
exactly,
are wise
but it can still be meaningful in the framework of human existence.
Yes.
I mean, if you pay your bills, if you have a roof over your head, if you have food on the table, you can spend your life writing poetry, and maybe nobody cares, but maybe it's a meaningful thing to you. Or you can do science, or you can sports, whatever. So I think that once we get out of this banker-centric system of governance, I mean, until about 2 centuries ago, we didn't even measure the GDP. Governments didn't even have fiscal budgets.
Yes.
This is why, a few months ago, I mean, I didn't even know how to convey this. And I wrote this article called Living in the Matrix or on God's Green Earth, because, we're still very often, when we think about problems of our existence and the solutions, that we still think of solutions that are inside of this matrix. It's like if you had generations of chickens who all they knew was the feedlot where they were being raised, and then you ask them, well, how would you make life better? And they would say, like, well, more fodder, better quality fodder, lights should go out at this time, or the cages should be a bit bigger because they're a bit too cramped, and so forth. There's not even the concept of what it means to live on God Green's earth, because all we know is this matrix. And all our theories, all our science, all our economics, anthropology, sociology, it's all treating the matrix like this is where we belong, this is where we have our problems, and this is where we have to figure out solutions. So maybe slightly bigger cages is going to make everybody happy. But what about if we bust the matrix open and who are we? Why are we here? What are we? What makes us happy? Or a better, maybe makes it less philosophical if we say, how would I want my children to exist? How would I want them to exist? How would I want them to raise their families and raise their children and so forth?
Yeah, that was well said. And I think that's the moral test, right? We're now paying the consequence of a lot of years of normalizing mediocrity and corruption. And so you can't do that indefinitely in this universe if the universe is actually wired according to principles of progress, of reason, stupidity can be tolerated, but not indefinitely. So now the consequence is a tsunami of reality heading at us, and we have to now think: do we shift gears and tap back into the source that I think you just touched on very nicely, very elegantly? That real value is associated with what are we creating for the next generations. That's a fact. It's not a philosophical pretty thing to say. It's a scientifically validatable fact. If we're not doing things with our creative decisions moment to moment that are tied to a consideration of our kids, grandkids, and those to come after, then we are doing things that will ultimately lead to less potential to sustain our population and more space for corrupt, dishonest powers to take advantage of people who think myopically and very short-termy. So I think you're right. This is a moral test for humanity. We're at a very big crossroads now in world history. Hopefully people who can actually make policy have tapped into. I believe that there's many adults in the room in Eurasia. I've seen some evidence of some signs of life in North America.
Yes.
Some. I hope it's as influential as you've pointed out and have alluded to, Alex. Glenn, Alex, guys, both of you, I so much appreciate these conversations and you guys sharing your insights. I don't know if you have any final words before we transition out. It's been a good hour and a half. And I think I've been following as much as I could the live chats, and everybody's very positive about this. Glenn, do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we close out?
No, well, just I guess a brief comment on what Alex talked about. This was kind of the key ideas of Max Weber criticism of modernity. That is a lot of the most important things, part of culture. That is, what we want to pass on to the next generation, which we have made, which then begins to define society, what connects everyone together. Yes, culture. That this is usually not based on the rational or necessarily the productive. So his concern as was over time there would be a cultural crisis, and the great painters, Michelangelos of our times, they would probably now work in making commercials for chewing gum, and this is kind of the point. You're not making anything worth handing over to the next generation. Over time there would be a cultural crisis, and then that's kind of the glue of society, which suggests we have something in common. Or so I think there's there's a good way of measuring economy prosperity and all in other ways than just always looking at the GDP.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Alex, do you want to? I think what you said before is already like perfect closing remarks. I don't know if you can get more elegant.
So you're asking,
do you want to raise the bar again?
You're asking me not to ruin it, right? Well, Matt, I think that we are blessed to be at such an important crossroads in humanity's history that I think maybe we're all meant, it's a philosophical thought, but maybe we're all meant to be at this time sharing this experience. And I think that we have the opportunity to make the world a better place for future generations. And so I think that it's incumbent upon us to pay attention, to try to think and understand the most relevant and most important issues, and for each of us to make as much of a contribution as we can. And there's a lot of us, so even if you can make a very, very marginal, small contribution, that still adds up to a huge potential change for the better. So I think everybody stand together, rejoice. The only way for us to fail is to either surrender and give up, or to fall for misdirection and how do you call it? Psyops. So
I was going to say Ursula says misinformation, and
yeah.
Psyops is the word. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. Yeah, thank you, and thank you everybody for tuning into this week's Floralia Dialogos. Keep in mind we do this every 2 weeks, so not next Sunday, but the Sunday afterwards. We'll be joined again to continue these kinds of explorations. We'll have a lot of world events to talk about. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit will have happened, so we'll unpeel that and a lot more. And for those who are into just continuing this growth of the mind, the Rising Tide Foundation at 2 p.m. New York time today will be hosting our weekly event, our weekly lecture. This one on the brotherhood of the common life and how Renaissance dynamics have been created throughout history, from the 12th century movement that sparked the training of orphans to study the classics, that generated Da Vinci's, that generated Cusas, that generated Thomas More's and Erasmus's. What made that possible? What were these cultural movements? That's at 2 p.m. today. People could just write into the risingtidefoundation.net if you'd like to tune into that one live. Otherwise, thank you guys, and thanks everybody. Till 2 weeks from now.
Thank you.